You're lying to yourself right now. And I don't say that to wound you. I say it because I spent 17 years of my life doing the same thing. I told myself I was being prudent when I was really being afraid. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment when I was really just choosing the warm bed over the cold morning. I told myself comfort was a reward I'd earned when it was actually a cage I'd built with my own 2 hands. Let me be direct with you, my friend. The most dangerous thing in your life isn't failure. It isn't rejection. It isn't even death itself. The most dangerous thing is the slow, silent drift into comfort. Because comfort doesn't announce itself as your enemy. It comes dressed as your friend. It whispers that you've worked hard enough, that you deserve rest, that tomorrow is soon enough to begin. And while you're listening to those sweet lies, your dreams are quietly dying in the corner of the room. I'm Benjamin Franklin, and I didn't come here to tell you what you want to hear. I came to tell you what you need to hear. Because 79 years of living taught me something that most people never learn until it's far too late. Greatness and comfort cannot live in the same house. One must always leave. And the question burning in front of you right now, whether you realize it or not, is which one you're going to choose. Now, before you think this is just another voice telling you to work harder, to hustle more, to never sleep and destroy yourself chasing some impossible standard, let me stop you right there. That's not what this is. I'm not here to break you down. I'm here to wake you up. There's a massive difference. Because what I discovered, through decades of mistakes and small victories, is that the path to a meaningful life isn't about rejecting all comfort. It's about understanding that comfort, when chosen too early and too often, becomes the very thing that separates you from the person you were meant to become. You feel it, don't you? That quiet knowing deep in your chest, that sense that you were built for something more than what you're currently doing. That whisper that comes in the early morning hours or late at night when the world is quiet and you're alone with your thoughts. It tells you there's another version of you waiting to emerge, a braver version, a more honest version, a version that stopped making excuses and started making moves. But then morning comes. The alarm sounds. And comfort wraps its arms around you and says, "Not today. Stay here where it's safe, where it's warm, where nothing is required of you." And you listen. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. And comfort is the most seductive force in human existence. I want to take you on a journey today. Not through some fantasy world, but through the real, messy, complicated path of a life lived in pursuit of something greater than ease. I want to show you what I learned about discomfort, about growth, about the price of staying where you are versus the cost of becoming who you're capable of being. And I want to do it with complete honesty. No sugarcoating. No pretending it's easy. But also no pretending it's not worth it. Because here's what I know for certain. At the end of your life, you won't regret the uncomfortable conversations you had. You won't regret the early mornings, or the hard work, or the moments you chose growth over ease. But you will regret the silence. You will regret the mornings you stayed in bed. You will regret choosing the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. And that regret, my friend, weighs more than any temporary discomfort ever could. So, if you're ready to hear something real, something that might actually change the direction of your life, then stay with me. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't theory. It's not something I read in a book and decided sounded nice. It's what I learned by living it, by failing at it, by getting it wrong over and over until I finally understood what was actually happening. The comfortable life you're protecting right now? It's costing you everything, and I'm going to show you exactly how. Let me tell you what this is really about. Because when I say comfort is the silent killer of greatness, I'm not talking about your couch, or your morning coffee, or the fact that you enjoy warm showers. I'm talking about something far more dangerous. I'm talking about the comfort of not trying, the comfort of not risking, the comfort of playing small, so you never have to face the possibility of failure. See, most people think comfort is about physical ease. A soft bed, a full belly, a warm house, and sure, those things are comfortable. But that's not the comfort that destroys dreams. The comfort that destroys dreams is psychological. It's the comfort of staying who you already are. The comfort of never challenging your own beliefs. The comfort of surrounding yourself only with people who agree with you. The comfort of never doing anything that might make you look foolish or inexperienced or vulnerable. This is what I learned, and it took me far too long to learn it. Every single day, you're choosing between comfort and growth, between staying where you are and moving toward where you want to be. And most of the time, you don't even realize you're making this choice because comfort disguises itself as reasonableness. It says, be realistic. Don't get your hopes up. Maybe you're just not that kind of person. And you believe it because believing it allows you to stay exactly where you are. But here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. You are that kind of person. You absolutely are capable of more than you're currently doing. The only difference between you and the people you admire isn't talent or intelligence or luck. It's that they got uncomfortable more often than you have. They chose the hard conversation. They chose the early morning. They chose to look stupid while learning something new. They chose discomfort over and over and over until they became someone new. And that's what I want for you. Not some exhausting life where you never rest and never enjoy anything, but a life where you're honest about when you're choosing comfort because you genuinely need it, versus when you're choosing comfort because you're afraid. Because there's a massive difference between rest and avoidance, between peace and stagnation, between contentment and giving up. I'm going to share with you the exact framework I used to build a life that mattered. Not a perfect life, not a life without mistakes or regrets, but a life where I can look back and say I tried. I showed up. I didn't let comfort steal my potential. And I want that for you, too. Not because I think you should live like I did, but because I think you should live like you. The real you. The one that exists underneath all the fear and excuses and comfortable lies. So let's begin. Let's talk about what comfort really costs. Let's talk about what happens when you finally choose discomfort. And let's talk about how to build a life that's both meaningful and sustainable. Because that's the secret nobody tells you. You don't have to choose between happiness and greatness. You just have to stop choosing comfort over both. Now, let me take you back to a specific moment in my life. A moment that changed everything. I was 17 years old, working in my brother's print shop in Boston. And I was absolutely miserable. Not because the work was hard. The work was fine. But because I could feel my life shrinking. Every single day felt the same. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. And there was a comfort in that predictability. A safety in knowing exactly what each day would bring. My brother James ran the shop, and he wasn't a bad man, but he was afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of risk. Afraid of anything that might disrupt the comfortable rhythm we'd established. And I watched that fear turn into bitterness. I watched him become smaller and smaller, his world closing in around him until all that remained was routine and resentment. And one day, I realized I was looking at my future. If I stayed in that shop, if I chose the comfort of the known over the terror of the unknown, I would become him. Not because he was wrong or bad, but because he had chosen safety over possibility. He had chosen comfort over growth. And that choice, made over and over across years, had transformed him into someone who had stopped dreaming entirely. So I did something that terrified me. I ran away. I left Boston with almost no money, no clear plan, and no guarantee that anything would work out. I walked into complete uncertainty, and it was the most uncomfortable thing I had ever done. I slept in strange places. I went hungry. I felt lost and afraid and completely out of my depth. There were 100 nights when I wanted to go back. When the comfort of that predictable life in my brother's shop seemed like heaven compared to the chaos I'd chosen. But here's what happened in that discomfort. I became someone new. With every uncomfortable situation I navigated, I got a little bit stronger, a little bit more capable, a little bit more confident that I could handle whatever came next. The discomfort wasn't destroying me. It was building me. Every cold night, every hungry morning, every moment of uncertainty was teaching me that I was more resilient than I'd ever known. And when I finally arrived in Philadelphia, I was a different person. Not because I'd succeeded at anything yet, I hadn't. I was broke, and alone, and starting from zero. But I had learned the most important lesson of my entire life. Discomfort is not the enemy. Comfort is. Because comfort keeps you who you are. But discomfort? Discomfort transforms you into who you could be. That print shop in Boston was comfortable. It was predictable. It was safe. And if I had stayed there, you wouldn't know my name. I would have lived a small, quiet life and died unknown. Not because I lacked potential, but because I chose comfort over that potential. And that's the choice in front of you right now. Not whether to run away from home or start some dramatic new adventure, but whether you're willing to get uncomfortable in the specific ways your life is asking you to get uncomfortable. Maybe it's having a hard conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's starting that project you keep putting off. Maybe it's admitting you're unhappy and need to change something. Maybe it's learning a new skill that makes you feel stupid and clumsy. Maybe it's setting a boundary with someone you love. Maybe it's taking a risk that might not work out. Whatever it is, you know what it is. That thing that makes your stomach tight when you think about it. That thing you keep pushing to tomorrow and next week and next month. That's your print shop. That's your moment of choice. And every day you choose comfort over that uncomfortable action, you're choosing to stay exactly who you currently are. Which means you're choosing to never become who you could be. Now I need to be clear about something because I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not romanticizing struggle. I'm not saying suffering is noble or that you should make your life unnecessarily difficult just to prove something. That's not wisdom. That's just foolishness wearing wisdom's clothing. What I'm saying is this. There's a difference between needless suffering and necessary discomfort. Needless suffering is staying in a situation that's genuinely harmful because you think you deserve punishment or because you're trying to prove how tough you are. That's not growth. That's self-destruction. But necessary discomfort? That's different. That's the discomfort that comes from growing, from learning, from trying something new, from being vulnerable, from having integrity even when it costs you. Doing the right thing even when the right thing is hard. That's the discomfort that builds character. That's the discomfort that transforms lives. And here's how you can tell the difference. Needless suffering makes you smaller. It diminishes you. It takes away your hope and your energy and your belief in yourself. But necessary discomfort, even though it's hard, even though it's scary, it makes you bigger. It expands who you are. And somewhere underneath the fear, there's a sense of rightness. A sense that this is hard, but it's the right kind of hard. The kind that's taking you somewhere worth going. I learned this distinction the hard way. There were times in my life when I confused the two. Times when I stayed in situations that were genuinely harmful because I thought that's what strength looked like. Times when I made things harder than they needed to be because I believed difficulty was the same as virtue, and I was wrong. Sometimes the strong thing is to leave. Sometimes the brave thing is to ask for help. Sometimes the wise thing is to choose the easier path, because the hard path is just hard, not meaningful. But most of us make the opposite mistake. We avoid all discomfort, meaningful or not. We flatten our lives into routines and habits and predictable patterns because unpredictability feels dangerous. And in doing so, we avoid not just suffering, but also growth. We avoid not just pain, but also possibility. We avoid not just failure, but also success. Because here's the thing about success that nobody tells you. Success requires you to repeatedly do things you're not good at yet. It requires you to fail publicly, to struggle visibly, to be the worst person in the room at something before you can become the best. Think about that for a moment. Every successful person you admire has spent hundreds, maybe thousands of hours being absolutely terrible at the thing they're now known for. The surgeon whose hand saved your life? They once trembled during their first incision. The author whose words moved you to tears? Their first drafts were laughably bad. The entrepreneur who built that company you admire? Their first pitch was probably a disaster. But here's what they understood that most people miss. Being bad at something isn't the opposite of success. It's the prerequisite. I learned this lesson hammering metal in my brother's print shop when I was 12 years old. My hands were too small, my strikes too weak, my timing all wrong. The older apprentices would snicker when I bent another piece beyond repair. Every morning, I'd wake up with blistered palms and bruised pride. And you know what the worst part was? I had to keep showing up. Day after day, I have been publicly demonstrating my incompetence. There was no hiding, no pretending I was better than I was. The evidence of my failures sat right there on the workbench for everyone to see. That's the part about growth nobody wants to talk about. The public humiliation of it. The vulnerability of trying something new in front of people who are already good at it. We live in a world where everyone curates their highlight reel, where we see the finished product but never the messy middle. So we develop this toxic belief that if we're not immediately good at something, we must not be meant to do it. We confuse current ability with future potential. We quit before we've permitted ourselves to be beginners. But natural talent? It's one of the most dangerous myths we tell ourselves, because it gives us an excuse. When we see someone excel at something, we can just shrug and say, well, they're naturally gifted. and absolve ourselves of any responsibility to develop that skill ourselves. I've watched this pattern destroy more potential than any external obstacle ever could. People permit themselves to quit because they weren't instantly brilliant. They mistake the absence of immediate mastery for the absence of possibility. The truth is, talent isn't what you're born with, it's what you build, brick by brick, through the unglamorous work nobody sees. I learned this not in moments of triumph, but in the dark hours before dawn when my printing press jammed for the 100th time and every fiber of my being wanted to walk away. The cultivation of skill requires something our modern world desperately lacks: patience with the process of becoming. You want to write? Then you must write badly first. You want to speak persuasively? Then you must stumble through clumsy arguments and watch them fall flat. You want to master a craft? Then you must accept that your early attempts will embarrass you. I printed thousands of pages before I produced one I considered truly excellent. I wrote countless articles that convinced no one before I learned how to move hearts and minds. The apprentice years aren't a detour around mastery, they are the only road that leads there. But here's what nobody tells you about building competence. The beginning is supposed to be hard. That difficulty isn't evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's confirmation that you're exactly where you need to be. The resistance you feel, that's your mind building new neural pathways. The frustration, that's the gap between your vision and your current ability, and that gap is sacred because it pulls you forward. I developed a practice that served me throughout my life. I made friends with incompetence. When I was terrible at something new, instead of fleeing from that feeling, I leaned into it. I'd say to myself, good. Today I'm collecting evidence of what doesn't work. Each failure is information. This reframe transformed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't failing, I was researching. The people who achieve extraordinary things aren't the ones who never struggle. They're the ones who struggle better. They've learned to extract wisdom from every awkward attempt, every miscalculation, every moment when their reach exceeded their grasp. They understand something profound. Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the raw material from which success is constructed. When I was younger, I used to visit a shipyard in Philadelphia regularly. I'd watch the craftsmen build vessels that would cross the Atlantic, and one master shipbuilder told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Benjamin, I learn nothing from the ships that sail perfectly. I learn everything from the ones that spring leaks." He kept detailed records of every failure: which joints weakened first, which wood warped under salt water, which design decisions looked brilliant on paper but proved disastrous at sea. His competitors mocked him for his meticulous documentation of mistakes. "Why dwell on your failures?" they'd ask. But here's what they didn't understand. He wasn't dwelling, he was mining. Each failure was a deposit of knowledge that his competitors were simply throwing away. Within a decade, his ships were the most sought after in the colonies because they were built on a foundation of refined failure. This is the hidden advantage of setbacks, their diagnostic tools of extraordinary precision. Success often masks problems. When something works, we rarely ask why. We take the victory and move on. But failure demands investigation. It forces us to open the hood, examine the mechanisms, and understand the true nature of the challenge we're facing. I've seen merchants lose fortunes because their initial success taught them nothing. Everything worked, so they assumed they understood the business. Then, when market conditions shifted, they had no foundation of knowledge to fall back on because they'd never had to truly learn. Compare that to the merchant who struggled for years, who faced bankruptcy twice, who had to understand every nuance of trade winds and tariffs and human nature just to survive. When opportunity finally arrived, he was ready because difficulty had been his education. The people we celebrate as overnight successes, talk to them honestly, away from the public eye, and you'll discover decades of invisible struggle. The writer whose first published novel becomes a sensation has 7 unpublished manuscripts in a drawer. The inventor whose patent changed an industry has a workshop full of prototypes that didn't work. They didn't succeed despite those failures. They succeeded through them, because of them, and built upon them. The modern world celebrates the breakthrough moment, the ribbon cutting, the product launch, the victory speech, but no one documents the ordinary Tuesday, when everything fell apart for the 3rd time. No one captures the moment when you have to choose between giving up and trying again with less money, less support, and less certainty than before. I learned this lesson most profoundly, not through my successes but through my son William. Here was a young man groomed for greatness, educated in the finest institutions, appointed royal governor of New Jersey. When the revolution came, we stood on opposite sides. The son I had raised, mentored, and loved, he chose loyalty to the crown over the cause I believed would liberate humanity. The personal agony was crushing. But here's what that heartbreak taught me about failure. Sometimes your greatest defeats aren't about what you attempted and missed. Sometimes they're about what you built successfully, only to watch it crumble in ways you never anticipated. I had failed as a father, not through absence or cruelty, but through the more subtle failure of creating a worldview in someone that ultimately divided us. Every letter I had written to William about civic duty, every conversation about governance and loyalty, I had succeeded in teaching him principles. I had failed to foresee that those very principles, interpreted differently, would make him my enemy. That failure never stopped hurting. We reconciled late in life, but the wound remained. And yet, that pain deepened my understanding of human complexity. It made me more effective in the diplomatic negotiations in France, where I had to work with men whose values differed vastly from mine. The failure with William taught me that even the best intentions, executed with love and care, can produce outcomes you never imagined. You see, failure isn't just about the experiment that doesn't work. It's about the relationships that fracture despite your best efforts. The ventures that collapse not because you did something wrong, but because 1,000 factors beyond your control aligned against you. The dreams you achieve only to discover they've transformed into something unrecognizable. And this is where the real maturity begins, when you recognize that some of your deepest suffering will come not from your mistakes, but from circumstances that were always beyond your reach. That's a bitter pill, isn't it? We want to believe in control. We want to think that if we just work hard enough, think clearly enough, and prepare thoroughly enough, we can prevent disaster. But life doesn't work that way. I watched a dear friend build a business for 15 years. Every decision was sound. Every expense justified. He treated his employees with dignity, his customers with respect. And then the market shifted. Not because of anything he did, not because he was lazy or foolish. The world simply changed underneath him, and his entire industry became obsolete within 18 months. I watched him wrestle with that reality, trying to find what he'd done wrong, where he'd failed. The truth was harder to accept. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose. This understanding doesn't make you helpless. It makes you humble. There's a profound difference. Helplessness is paralysis. Humility is recognition. When you accept the limits of your control, you stop wasting energy on self-recrimination for things that were never yours to command. You stop torturing yourself with what-if scenarios that presume you had powers you never possessed. You learn to distinguish between the suffering you caused and the suffering that simply found you. That distinction isn't about escaping responsibility. It's about placing responsibility precisely where it belongs. When you fail someone through negligence, own it completely. When circumstances beyond your control create pain, acknowledge it without absorbing false guilt. I've seen people destroy themselves with misplaced responsibility. They carry the weight of every bad outcome as if they were gods who failed to prevent it, rather than humans navigating an uncertain world. That's not virtue. That's arrogance dressed in the clothes of humility. True humility recognizes that you're powerful enough to cause real harm and limited enough that you cannot prevent all harm. So yes, you will suffer from forces beyond your control. The question is whether that suffering will teach you acceptance or drive you into delusion, whether it will deepen your compassion or harden your heart. The difference lies not in the amount of pain you experience, but in your relationship with truth during that pain. I've watched people lose everything: their homes, their reputations, their loved ones, and emerge with a clarity that borders on the sacred. Not because they stayed positive or manifested abundance, but because they stopped lying to themselves about what was happening. There's a particular kind of freedom that comes from saying, "This is unbearable, and I must bear it anyway." That sentence contains no delusion, no toxic hope, no pretending that everything happens for a reason you'll someday understand. It's simply the raw acknowledgement that life has placed you in an impossible position and you're going to walk through it with your eyes open. Compare this to the modern mantra: "Everything I'm going through is preparing me for what I asked for." Do you see the difference? One statement accepts reality. The other warps reality to protect your ego from confronting meaningless suffering. The person who can say, "This is unbearable, and I must bear it," has learned what the ancients knew: that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That dignity isn't comfort, but the refusal to lie about your circumstances. I learned this watching people die, by the way. You learn who someone really is when death removes the possibility of a better future. Some people rage against reality until their final breath, insisting that if they just think the right thoughts, death will pass them by. Others accept what's coming with a grace that makes everyone in the room feel they've witnessed something holy. The graceful ones aren't more spiritual. They're simply more honest. And here's what nobody tells you about that honesty. It doesn't make the pain less. It makes the pain times meaningful times in a way that has nothing to do with cosmic purpose or divine plans. When you stop trying to explain why something happened and simply acknowledge that it did happen, you stop wasting energy on narratives that comfort you and start using that energy to actually respond to your circumstances. This is practical wisdom, not philosophical abstraction. The widow who accepts her grief, instead of insisting her husband is watching over her, can actually process her loss. The entrepreneur who admits his business failed because of his own mistakes instead of blaming Mercury in retrograde can learn something useful. Truth is a knife. It cuts away the stories you tell yourself, and what remains is raw and real and workable. And what is workable matters more than what is comfortable. I've watched people cling to comfortable lies for years, decades even, building entire lives on foundations of sand. They surround themselves with yes men who validate their delusions. They read only the news that confirms what they already believe. They interpret every failure as bad luck and every success as earned genius. This is not living. This is sleepwalking. Truth demands something from you. It demands that you look at your bank account and acknowledge the numbers as they are, not as you wish they were. It demands that you weigh yourself and see the scale, not the fantasy version you imagine. It demands that you listen to what your spouse is actually saying during that argument, not what you've decided they mean based on your own insecurities. I once knew a man in Philadelphia who insisted he was an excellent father. He worked long hours, he said, to provide for his family. He missed dinners, forgot birthdays, and was absent for his children's important moments, but in his mind, the money he brought home was love made tangible. When his eldest son left for university and didn't write home for 6 months, the man was bewildered. "After everything I've done for him," he said. The truth? His son didn't know him. They were strangers who happened to share a last name and a dinner table on rare occasions. But acknowledging that truth would have required the man to face years of choices he'd made, to admit that his priorities had been wrong, that he'd traded intimacy for income and lost something irreplaceable. He never did face it. He died believing himself misunderstood rather than absent. This is the cost of avoiding truth. You don't just lie to others, you forfeit your own life. Every moment spent maintaining a false narrative is a moment you're not actually living. You're performing a character in a play you wrote to impress an audience that isn't even watching. Truth strips away the performance. It says, here you are, exactly as you are, with all your flaws and possibilities laid bare. Now, what will you do with this information? And here's the paradox that confuses people. Truth is simultaneously harsh and liberating. The truth that you're not special doesn't crush you. It frees you. Because once you stop protecting an inflated image of yourself, you can actually start building something real. It's like trying to construct a house on quicksand versus bedrock. The fantasy version of yourself is quicksand. It shifts, it's unstable, it requires constant maintenance. The truth is bedrock. Solid, reliable, something you can actually build on. I spent years avoiding mirrors, metaphorically speaking. Not because I thought I was hideous, but because I was terrified of seeing myself clearly. I'd crafted this narrative. I'm the misunderstood genius. I'm the person who would succeed if only the world recognized my talent. Classic delusion. And every time reality contradicted this story, I'd blame external factors. The system is rigged. People don't understand. My boss is an idiot. Then one day, someone I respected said something devastating. You know what your problem is? You're in love with your own potential. That sentence detonated in my head. Because he was absolutely right. I wasn't in love with achievement. I was in love with the idea of achievement. I was addicted to possibility, to potential, to the fantasy of what I could become. But I was doing nothing to actualize it. That's when the mirror became useful. I asked myself, strip away the story. Strip away the excuses. Strip away the potential. What have I actually done? And the answer was humbling. Not much. I had a lot of ideas. I had a lot of plans. But actual execution? Minimal. The mirror showed me someone who talked more than he did. Someone who planned more than he created. Someone who was waiting for perfect conditions that would never arrive. This is what truth does. It removes the buffer between you and reality. You stop negotiating with life and start living it. And here's what nobody tells you about that moment. It's terrifying. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to blaming your circumstances. You can't retreat into the comfortable fiction that you're a victim of external forces beyond your control. I remember walking through the streets of Philadelphia after one of these realizations hit me. It was early morning, fog still hanging over the cobblestones, and I felt simultaneously liberated and exposed. Like I'd been living in a house with walls made of paper, and someone had just struck a match. The truth was this: every single day, I wasn't working toward my goals, was a day I was choosing comfort over progress. Not a day stolen from me. Not a day I couldn't help. A day I chose times to waste. That distinction between can't and won't is where transformation lives. When you say I can't wake up early, what you really mean is I won't endure the temporary discomfort of changing my sleep schedule. When you say I can't save money, you mean I won't prioritize future security over present pleasure. When you say I can't learn that skill, you mean I won't invest the hundreds of hours required to develop competence. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's the truth that will set you free. Because can't makes you a victim. Won't makes you a decision maker. And decision makers can change their minds. This is how I built everything in my life. Not through extraordinary talent. I was a candlemaker's son with barely any formal education. Not through perfect circumstances. I ran away from my apprenticeship with nothing but the clothes I wore, but through the simple, powerful recognition that I was the author of my own story. Every morning, I would ask myself, what am I building today? Not what am I hoping for? Not what I wish would happen. What am I actively constructing with the hours I've been given? Most people never ask that question. They drift through their days like leaves on a river, responding to whatever current catches them, then wonder why they end up somewhere they never intended to go. The uncomfortable truth is that our lives are the sum of our daily choices, multiplied by time. That tavern I visited each evening wasn't just stealing 3 hours, it was stealing my future. 3 hours a day equals 21 hours a week, over 1,000 hours a year. Do you know what I could have built with 1,000 hours? I could have mastered another language, written another book, developed another invention, built another business. Instead, I was trading the irreplaceable currency of my existence for temporary escape and fleeting conversation with men who would forget my name the moment I stopped buying rounds. But here's what makes this realization truly devastating. Those 1,000 hours weren't just lost, they were invested in becoming someone I didn't want to be. Every hour you spend becomes part of who you are. You cannot give time to something without giving it power over your identity. The men at that tavern weren't just my companions, they were sculpting my character with every jest, every complaint, every small-minded observation. I was becoming the sum of their limited ambitions. My vocabulary was shrinking to match theirs. My dreams were contracting to fit their reality. This is the hidden cost nobody calculates. We think we're just passing time, but we're actually being shaped by how we pass it. Show me how a man spends his Tuesday evening, and I'll show you who he's becoming. I watch people today treat their time like an infinite resource. They'll spend 4 hours scrolling through other people's carefully curated lives, then claim they don't have time to build their own. They'll invest entire evenings in fictional dramas, while their real story remains unwritten. And when you point this out, they defend these choices with remarkable creativity. I need to unwind, they say. I deserve a break. As if relaxation can only come through surrender. As if rest requires the complete abdication of intention. But there's a profound difference between rest and escape. Rest restores you. Escape depletes you. Rest is a strategic withdrawal to regain strength. Escape is desertion from the life you're supposed to be commanding. I learned to rest, deliberately. A walk through Philadelphia's streets, observing the architecture, the people, the way light fell through trees that restored me. A conversation with someone whose mind worked differently from mine that energized me. Reading philosophy before bed that prepared my subconscious to work while I slept. These weren't just breaks from work. They were different kinds of work, building different parts of who I was becoming. You see, The real magic of time management isn't squeezing more into your hours. It's understanding that different activities feed different hungers. When I worked on my printing projects, I was feeding ambition. When I read philosophy, I was feeding on wisdom. When I walked through Philadelphia's streets, I was making observations. Most people treat their time like a single bucket. They just keep pouring tasks into it until it overflows. I treated mine like a garden with different plots. Some grew quickly, needing daily attention. Others matured slowly, needing patience and the right season. This is why I could pursue so many things without burning out. I wasn't doing more, I was doing different. There's an enormous difference. Let me tell you about the summer of 1729. I was acquiring a failing newspaper, launching a new printing venture, continuing my studies in science, and maintaining my social clubs. On paper, impossible. In practice, each activity recharged a different part of me. The physical work of the print shop tired my body but sharpened my business mind. Writing for the newspaper exhausted my creative energy, but filled me with purpose. The scientific experiments drained my analytical reserves but sparked my curiosity for the next question. The club discussions depleted my social batteries but connected me to ideas I'd never have found alone. I wasn't juggling, I was orchestrating. Each instrument played its part, and together they created something far richer than any single note could produce. Here's what nobody tells you about productivity. Rest isn't the opposite of work. The wrong work is the opposite of the right work. When I felt drained from writing, I didn't collapse on my bed. I went to the print shop and worked with my hands. The physicality restored what the mental work had depleted. This is the secret the modern world has forgotten. You don't need more time. You need more dimensions in how you use it. Let me share something that transformed how I operated. The principle of temporal layering. Most people think of their day as a single timeline: breakfast, work, dinner, sleep. But I discovered you could fold time onto itself, creating what I called nested productivity. While waiting for printing jobs to dry, I'd sketch electrical diagrams. During postal route planning, I'd simultaneously test social theories by observing human behavior. Every carriage ride became a mobile laboratory for cloud observation. The junto meetings I founded weren't just weekly gatherings, they were compound interest machines for ideas. We'd assign readings, then discuss them while sharing a meal. Then apply those concepts in our respective trades throughout the week, then reconvene to share results. One meeting generated value across 4 time dimensions: anticipation, execution, application, and reflection. This is what I mean by temporal architecture. Consider my daily schedule, which confused many of my contemporaries. I'd rise at 5, but that first hour wasn't morning routine. It was 3 distinct activities woven together: physical exercise while mentally composing letters, breakfast while reading in multiple languages, personal grooming while conducting memory exercises, reciting what I'd learned the previous day. People would say, "Franklin, you're doing too many things at once." But that's exactly backwards. I was doing each thing more fully by understanding how they could reinforce each other. Physical movement enhanced mental clarity. Multiple languages created cognitive flexibility. Memory work strengthened both. The printing press taught me this. You don't set one letter at a time, wait for it to dry, then set the next. You compose entire pages, understanding how each element relates to the whole. Time works the same way. Here's what shocks people. I took a 2-hour midday break every single day. In a life everyone considers impossibly productive, I deliberately stopped. But those 2 hours weren't rest, they were strategic reset points. I'd read philosophy, conduct experiments, or simply think. This wasn't time subtracted from productivity. It was the fulcrum that made everything else possible. Without those pauses, my mind would have been a printing press, running the same page endlessly. The break created the space where different ideas could collide, where morning insights could marinate, and where new patterns could emerge. This terrifies modern workers. You've been taught that stopping equals losing, but observation reveals the truth. A bow, kept constantly drawn, loses its power. I learned this during the Constitutional Convention. For 4 months, we debated in Philadelphia, summer heat turning that room into an oven. Young delegates wanted to push through exhaustion, work straight until midnight. I was 81, older than anyone there. I insisted on breaks. Not because I was feeble, but because I'd watched countless negotiations collapse when tired men made permanent decisions. We'd adjourn, take meals, and walk outside. Those pauses saved the Constitution more than any speech I gave. The human mind isn't designed for continuous output. Your brain consumes 20% of your body's energy, while representing only 2% of your weight. It's the most expensive organ you possess. And like any expensive tool, it requires maintenance. But you've been conditioned by modern work culture to ignore the warning signs. Your attention fragments. You reread the same paragraph 4 times. You snap at colleagues over minor issues. These aren't character flaws, they're your body screaming for restoration. The solution isn't complex, but it requires courage. You must defend your recovery time as fiercely as you defend your work time. I took daily walks, without fail. Not for exercise primarily, though that helped. I walked to let my mind wander, to give problems space to breathe. The number of insights that came to me while strolling through Philadelphia markets would astonish you. Solutions I'd fought for hours at my desk would simply appear between the cobblestones. This is what modern neuroscience calls the default mode network, your brain's background processing system. It only activates when you stop forcing focused work. It connects disparate ideas, finds creative solutions, and processes emotions. But it needs space to operate. You're blocking this system every time you scroll through your phone between tasks, every time you jump from one meeting directly into another. You're preventing the very mechanism that would make you more effective. Here's what I practiced. What you must implement. Deliberate restoration periods built into your schedule, like immovable appointments. I treated these restoration periods with the same seriousness as my diplomatic meetings with French ministers, because that's exactly what they were: appointments with myself, negotiations with my own capacity for sustained excellence. After 2 hours of concentrated work on scientific experiments, I would deliberately step away. Not collapse into distraction, but engage in purposeful recovery. I'd sit in my garden, feeling the sun on my face, letting my mind wander without an agenda. Or I'd play my glass harmonica, those haunting tones requiring just enough attention to occupy my conscious mind while allowing my deeper faculties to reorganize themselves. The modern equivalent isn't scrolling social media between meetings. That's not restoration, that's trading one form of mental taxation for another, often a more depleting one. True restoration means genuine disengagement from information processing. A walk where you actually notice your surroundings, sitting quietly with your thoughts, playing an instrument, physical movement that doesn't demand your phone's accompaniment. I scheduled these restoration windows the same way you schedule important meetings. Wednesday afternoons were reserved for correspondence and light reading, Sunday mornings for reflection and planning the week. These weren't indulgences, they were the infrastructure that made everything else possible. And here's what I observed: that modern productivity culture desperately needs to relearn. The quality of your work during focused periods increases dramatically when you've properly restored beforehand. My writing was sharper, my problem-solving more creative, my patience with diplomatic intricacies more abundant, not despite the time I spent in restoration, but because of it. You cannot withdraw from an account you haven't deposited into. Every period of intense focus is a withdrawal. Restoration is how you make deposits. Keep withdrawing without depositing, and you'll find yourself intellectually bankrupt, staring at screens without comprehension, attending meetings without real presence, producing work that meets minimum standards but contains none of your actual capability. I've watched this pattern destroy otherwise brilliant minds. People who mistake constant motion for productivity, who wear exhaustion as a badge of honor, who've forgotten that a dull blade, no matter how forcefully applied, cuts nothing cleanly. Your modern world has somehow convinced itself that rest is weakness, that restoration is laziness, that any moment not spent in productive activity is a moment wasted. I find this attitude both perplexing and tragically short-sighted. In my time, even the hardest working farmer understood that land must lie fallow, that horses must be rested, that tools must be maintained. Yet you've somehow exempted your own minds and bodies from this universal principle, as if human beings alone among all of creation can operate indefinitely without consequence. I maintained my effectiveness across 8 decades, not through superhuman endurance, but through strategic restoration. My daily schedule included deliberate breaks, what I called air baths, simply sitting unclothed by an open window for half an hour, allowing my skin to breathe and my mind to wander. You might laugh at such simplicity, yet I guarantee those 30 minutes of apparent doing nothing contributed more to my subsequent productivity than an extra hour of forced intellectual labor would have provided. I swam regularly, walked extensively, and played games that engaged my mind without the burden of consequence. These weren't indulgences stolen from my productive hours, they were investments that multiplied the value of those hours. The scientific experiments I conducted after a swim possessed a creativity and precision that late-night, exhausted efforts could never match. The diplomatic letters I composed following a walk contained nuance and persuasiveness that forced composition would have lacked. The conversations I engaged in after proper rest built alliances that shaped a nation, while exhausted negotiation might have fractured them irreparably. Consider how you actually spend your so-called rest time. You leave work physically but remain mentally tethered. Checking emails during dinner, reviewing documents before bed, waking to notifications that pull you immediately back into work mode. You call it dedication. I call it a failure to understand how human capability actually functions. Your brain requires complete disconnection to process, consolidate, and prepare for renewed effort. Half-presence isn't rest, it's a diluted form of work that provides neither productivity nor restoration, leaving you perpetually in a state of partial effectiveness that serves neither professional nor personal life well. Consider the concept of strategic idleness, something modern culture has completely abandoned in favor of perpetual motion. In my era, we understood that sitting quietly with one's thoughts wasn't laziness, it was preparation. I spent countless afternoons in apparent inactivity, staring out windows, walking without a destination, allowing my mind to wander through problems without forcing solutions. Those periods of seeming non-productivity generated my most valuable insights. Your culture has pathologized this essential mental process. You've created an environment where stillness triggers anxiety, where moments without external stimulation feel like personal failure. You reach for your phone during every pause, waiting in line, sitting in a waiting room, even walking from one room to another, as if the absence of input represents wasted time rather than opportunity for internal processing. This constant stimulation creates a paradoxical form of mental starvation. You're consuming endless information while denying your mind the quiet necessary to digest any of it. It's like eating continuously without pause for digestion. You're simultaneously overfed and undernourished, bloated with unprocessed content that provides no actual sustenance. The greatest ideas rarely arrive during focused work. They emerge in the shower, during walks, in those twilight moments before sleep when your conscious mind finally releases its grip and allows deeper patterns to surface. But you've scheduled those moments away, filled them with podcasts and notifications, and eliminated the spaciousness where insight traditionally resided. I'll share something that may disturb you. Your best thinking happens when you're not trying to think at all. The conscious mind, for all its complexity, operates like a narrow spotlight, intense but limited. Your unconscious mind processes vastly more information, recognizes patterns your awareness never notices, and solves problems your deliberate effort cannot crack. But it requires space to work, silence to be heard. You've built a life that drowns out this deeper intelligence completely. Every quiet moment filled, every pause eliminated, every second accounted for in your relentless march towards some undefined notion of maximum productivity. And you wonder why your work feels increasingly mechanical, why creativity eludes you, why solutions that should be obvious remain frustratingly out of reach. The wisdom you seek often already exists within you, waiting not to be created but to be heard, but you'll never hear it through the noise you've surrounded yourself with. Now, let me tell you about the sixth costly mistake, and this one breaks my heart because I see it destroying the very fabric of what made humans extraordinary. You've stopped teaching yourself anything difficult. I don't mean you've stopped consuming information. You're consuming more than ever. But there's a catastrophic difference between consuming and learning, between exposure and mastery, between knowing about something and knowing how to do it. When I wanted to understand electricity, I didn't read summaries. I didn't watch someone else's condensed explanation. I flew kites in thunderstorms. I built batteries. I shocked myself literally, until I understood the principles through my own investigation and failure. When I wanted to master printing, I spent years setting type by hand, mixing inks, operating presses until the craft became instinctive. When I taught myself French, Italian, Spanish, and Latin, I sat with difficult texts for hours, wrestling with grammar and vocabulary until understanding emerged through genuine effort. This is how the human mind was designed to acquire deep knowledge through struggle, through confusion, through the demanding process of pushing past your current capabilities. But you've outsourced the struggle. You want the summary, the cliff notes, the explain it to me like I'm five version of everything. You've convinced yourself this is efficiency, that you're learning more by consuming condensed versions of complex ideas. You're not. You're creating the illusion of knowledge while building nothing substantial. You're like someone who reads restaurant reviews and believes they've learned to cook. The menu is not the meal. The map is not the territory. The summary is not the understanding. Real learning, the kind that changes your brain structure, that builds genuine capability, that allows you to apply knowledge in novel situations, requires extended cognitive strain. It requires sitting with difficulty until a breakthrough occurs. It requires the specific type of frustration that precedes mastery. You've eliminated this from your life. And worse, you've started avoiding anything that can't be learned quickly. I watched this pattern repeat with a young fellow recently. Bright mind, excellent education. He wanted to learn the guitar. Spent an entire afternoon researching the optimal learning method, downloaded 3 different apps, watched comparison videos of teaching styles. By evening, he'd created a perfect practice schedule, but hadn't touched the instrument once. The next day, he practiced for 12 minutes before checking his phone to see if he was doing it right. The algorithm, sensing his uncertainty, immediately offered him a video. Master guitar in 30 days. He watched it. Then another. Why most people learn guitar wrong. Then a third. The only guitar technique you actually need. He never made it to day 2 of practice. You see the trap, don't you? He outsourced the very struggle that would have taught him. The frustration of wrong finger placement, the ache of building calluses, the humbling experience of sounding terrible. These weren't obstacles to overcome but the actual curriculum. The difficulty was the lesson. But our modern world has sold you a magnificent lie, that there's always a shortcut, a hack, a one weird trick that will let you skip the struggle. And the algorithm is happy to feed this delusion endlessly because the search for shortcuts keeps you watching far longer than actually doing the work ever would. Let me be clear, there are no shortcuts to things worth knowing. None. I spent years learning to write clearly, decades of understanding electricity, a lifetime studying human nature. There was no app, no compressed timeline, no productivity hack that could have replaced those hours of frustrated confusion. And here's what troubles me most. You've stopped being able to distinguish between real learning and the feeling of learning. You watch a documentary and feel informed. You read a summary and feel knowledgeable. You save an article and feel productive. But information consumption isn't understanding. It's not even close. True understanding comes from wrestling with ideas until they submit, from applying concepts until they fail, then figuring out why, from teaching others and discovering the gaps in your own knowledge. This takes time. Focused, undistracted, and often uncomfortable time. Your ancestors knew this instinctively. They didn't mistake consumption for contribution. They understood that a man's worth wasn't measured by what flowed through his hands, but what remained after his labor. You see this confusion everywhere now. People treat knowledge like fast food, convenient, immediately satisfying, requiring no preparation. They collect facts like trading cards, arrange them in neat digital folders, and are convinced that possession equals understanding. But facts without context are just noise. Information without integration is merely clutter wearing the disguise of wisdom. I'll tell you what genuine learning looks like. It looks like a struggle, like sitting with a difficult text until your eyes burn, like wrestling with an idea that refuses to yield its meaning easily, like revising your understanding 6 times because each layer reveals how shallow the previous one was. The ancient craftsman understood this. A master cabinet maker didn't just know about wood, he knew wood. He could tell you how oak responds to humidity differently from maple, which grain patterns indicate strength, which signal weakness, how the tree's position on the hillside affected the characteristics of its timber. This knowledge couldn't be downloaded or summarized. It came from decades of attention, of failure, of touch and smell, and patient observation. Your brain craves this kind of depth. It evolved for exactly this type of sustained engagement. The neural pathways that create genuine expertise are built slowly through repetition and challenge and consolidation. There are no shortcuts. The brain physically changes in response to deep practice. But only deep practice, not the shallow skimming that passes for learning today. And here's what makes me genuinely concerned. An entire generation is growing up believing that learning should be effortless, that if understanding doesn't come immediately, the problem is with the material, not their approach. They've been sold the lie that real knowledge should feel smooth, entertaining, and optimized for engagement. But the most valuable knowledge has always been guarded by difficulty. Not artificial difficulty, not gatekeeping or unnecessary complexity, but the inherent challenge of truly understanding something profound. Mathematics doesn't yield its secrets to the casual observer. Philosophy requires sustained contemplation. Mastery in any field demands what your generation calls grinding, but what we simply call work. The tragedy is that by avoiding this difficulty, people rob themselves of the deepest satisfaction human beings can experience. The moment when something genuinely difficult finally makes sense. The satisfaction I speak of cannot be purchased, cannot be streamed, cannot be delivered to your door in 2 days. It can only be earned through the kind of mental labor that makes your brain ache, that forces you to read the same passage 5 times, that requires you to sit with confusion until clarity emerges. I remember teaching myself geometry. There were no videos to watch, no one to break it down into digestible segments, just Euclid's theorems and my own determination to understand them. For weeks, I struggled. My head throbbed. I grew frustrated. But when understanding finally arrived, when I could suddenly see how one proof led inevitably to the next, the rush of genuine comprehension was intoxicating. That feeling became addictive. I chased it my entire life. Your society has mistaken the elimination of difficulty for progress. But difficulty is not a bug in the system of learning. It is the entire point. The struggle is where the growth happens. The confusion is where curiosity is born. The frustration is what makes eventual mastery meaningful. Consider writing. Everyone today fancies themselves a writer because they can type words into a device, but writing, real writing, is thinking made visible. It requires you to clarify muddy thoughts, to organize chaos, to find exactly the right word when 17 similar ones present themselves. This is difficult work. It cannot be automated or outsourced, or made effortless without losing the very thing that makes it valuable. I revised Poor Richard's Almanac endlessly. Each maxim was distilled from paragraphs, each paragraph from pages of thought. A penny saved is a penny earned, did not arrive, fully formed, it was carved from excess, like a sculpture from marble. The difficulty was the point. The modern world treats difficulty as dysfunction. If writing is hard, take a course. If focus wavers, find a technique. If discipline falters, download an app. I understand the impulse. I, too, sought systems and methods. But I never mistook the scaffold for the building. The difficult work cannot be outsourced to future technology or better conditions. You will not write clearly when you have more time. You will not think deeper when circumstances improve. The mind you bring to the work tomorrow is the mind you sharpen today, and sharpening requires friction. I remember a particular winter evening, snow pressing against the windows of my printing shop, when I spent 4 hours on a single paragraph for the Gazette. 4 hours. The candles burned low. My hand cramped. The words refused cooperation. A younger apprentice might have abandoned the effort, printed something adequate, and moved on. But I had learned that adequate is the enemy of memorable. The mediocre fills space. The excellent creates it. That paragraph, I cannot even recall its subject now. Some local matter long dissolved into history taught me more than its content warranted. It taught me that the struggle itself builds capacity. Each difficult session at the desk increased my ability to endure the next difficult session. The muscle of attention grew stronger through resistance, not rest. This is why I distrust the promise of effortless creativity. Follow your passion, they say, as if passion were a reliable guide. Passion is magnificent for ignition, useless for endurance. I was passionate about many things that proved worthless. I was not always passionate about the tasks that proved essential. Discipline allowed me to work when passion slept. You ask how to maintain discipline across decades? You stop asking. The question itself reveals the problem. You are still negotiating with yourself, still seeking permission to quit when difficulty arrives. I did not maintain discipline. I became disciplined. The distinction matters. One is a practice you perform. The other is an identity you inhabit. The practice becomes who you are through repetition across years, not days. I didn't wake up on my second morning of rising at 5 and declare myself disciplined. That would have been hollow arrogance. But when I'd done it for 1,000 mornings, when my body woke before the sun without needing to be told, when the choice disappeared because the habit had carved itself into my very nature, that's when discipline stopped being something I did and became something I was. You cannot fake this transformation. The world will test whether your discipline is costume or constitution. And it tests you precisely when you're exhausted, discouraged, when no one is watching, when breaking your commitment would be easier than keeping it. I remember a winter evening in 1728. I was 22, working at my printing press after everyone else had gone home. My fingers were numb. My eyes burned from squinting at type in candlelight. I had a warm bed waiting. I had every rational reason to stop, but I'd made myself a promise that morning. I would complete the job before sleeping. Not because anyone would know if I didn't. Not because the customer was expecting it the next day he wasn't. But because I'd given my word to myself, and if I couldn't trust my own commitments, what worth had any promise I made to anyone else? So I stayed. I finished. I walked home in the dark, fell into bed, and woke the next morning to do it again. That single evening didn't make me disciplined, but it was one thread in a fabric woven from 10,000 similar choices. Each thread is almost invisible, fragile, seemingly inconsequential, but weave enough of them together, day after day, year after year, and you create something that can't be torn apart. This is what people misunderstand about discipline. They think it's about the big moments, the dramatic declarations, the New Year's resolutions, the grand gestures. It isn't. It's about the 1,000 tiny moments when no one's watching and nothing's at stake except your relationship with yourself. Do you keep your promise to yourself when breaking it would be convenient? That's the only question that matters. Because here's what I learned in my 70 years of keeping this accounting of my soul. Integrity isn't something you decide once and then coast on forever. It's not a merit badge you earn in your youth and then pin to your chest for the rest of your days. It's a practice, a daily discipline, a muscle that either grows stronger with use or atrophies from neglect. Every morning when I woke, I faced the same choice you face now. Would I be the person I claimed to be, or would I make exceptions? Would I honor my commitments to myself, or would I rationalize why today was different? Why this situation was special? Why these circumstances made it okay to compromise? And I won't lie to you, there were mornings when the wrong choice felt so appealing. Days when keeping my word to myself seemed unnecessarily difficult. Moments when I looked at men around me, cutting corners, making excuses, and seemingly getting ahead just fine. But I kept my ledger. I kept score. And over time, a pattern emerged that changed everything I understood about success. The men who made exceptions, who bent their rules when it suited them, who told themselves that integrity was situational, they built lives that looked impressive from the outside, but were hollow at the core. Their achievements were real, yes, but they stood on foundations of sand. One wrong wind, one shift in fortune, and everything collapsed. But the ones who kept faith with themselves, who honored their word even in the small things, who built their lives on bedrock rather than convenience, they constructed something that could weather any storm. Not because they were perfect, not because they never failed, but because they knew who they were. Because when a crisis came, they didn't have to wonder whether they could trust themselves. They had proof. Years of evidence show that when they committed, they kept it. That's what those 13 virtues gave me. Not perfection, not moral superiority, but proof. Evidence that I could trust myself. A record of promises kept, even when keeping them was inconvenient. And that proof became the foundation of everything I built. But here's something most people miss about this whole system of self-improvement: it wasn't about achieving perfection. That was never the goal, despite what the name moral perfection might suggest. The goal was awareness. The goal was honest confrontation with who I actually was, not who I imagined myself to be. You see, most people walk through life with a distorted self-image. They remember the 2 times they showed up early and forget the 20 times they were late. They recall the one generous gesture and overlook the dozen moments of pettiness. They construct a story about themselves that's convenient rather than accurate. My chart didn't allow for that kind of self-deception. It forced me to confront the reality of my behavior. Not the story I told myself, but the actual evidence of my actions. And this confrontation, it was uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable. There were weeks when I'd look at that chart and feel genuine shame. Not the performative shame we show others, but the private reckoning that happens when nobody's watching. The kind that makes you sit with yourself in the quiet and ask, is this really who I want to be? But that discomfort, that was the point. That was where the growth happened. Because you cannot change what you refuse to see. You cannot improve what you will not measure. And you cannot become better if you're constantly lying to yourself about where you currently stand. The chart was my mirror. Sometimes it showed me something beautiful, a week of genuine progress, evidence of real growth. Other times it showed me something I didn't want to see, patterns of behavior I'd been avoiding, weaknesses I'd been excusing. Both reflections were necessary. Both were valuable. And gradually, something unexpected happened. The act of tracking itself became transformative. Just knowing I would have to mark that chart at the end of the day changed how I moved through each moment. Before speaking, I'd pause and think about silence. Is this truly worth saying? Before committing, I'd consider resolution. Can I actually follow through on this? Before judging someone harshly, I'd remember justice. Am I being fair or just convenient? The virtues stopped being abstract ideals and became practical questions I asked myself dozens of times each day. This is the power of a good system. It doesn't just track your behavior, it shapes it. It doesn't just record your life, it changes how you live it. And here's what most people don't understand. The system works even when you don't feel like it. Especially when you don't feel like it. There were mornings in Philadelphia when I woke exhausted. When the printing press felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. When the thought of one more page, one more letter, one more proof made me want to crawl back under the covers. But I had my chart on the wall. I had my 13 virtues staring at me. And I had made a promise not to some abstract future version of myself, but to the system, to the process, to the simple act of putting a mark on paper. So I got up, not because I was inspired, not because I felt motivated, but because the system told me what to do next. That's the dirty little secret of discipline that no one wants to hear. Most of the time, you won't feel like doing the right thing. Most days, you'll wake up tired, distracted, doubtful. The voice in your head will give you 1,000 reasons why today can be the exception. And if you're relying on willpower alone, that voice will win. Because willpower is a muscle that gets tired, it depletes throughout the day. By evening, you're running on fumes. But a system doesn't get tired. It doesn't have bad days. It doesn't care about your mood or your excuses, or whether Mercury is in retrograde. The system simply says, here's what happens next. I've seen this principle prove itself across centuries. The writer who publishes a new article every Monday doesn't wait for inspiration, she has a system that demands output. The athlete who never misses a workout doesn't rely on motivation, he has a routine that removes the decision entirely. The system becomes automatic. It becomes who you are. And that's when something magical happens. The resistance disappears. Not because the work gets easier, but because you stop fighting it. You stop negotiating with yourself every single day about whether you'll show up. You just show up. Because that's what the system does. This is how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. Not through superhuman willpower, not through some genetic gift, but through the simple, unsexy act of following a system day after day after day, until one day you look back and realize you've become someone completely different, someone you barely recognize. That person staring back at you in the mirror didn't appear overnight. They were built, one choice at a time, one difficult conversation you didn't avoid. One morning, you showed up when every cell in your body screamed to stay in bed. One moment of integrity when no one was watching. You want to know what true wealth looks like? It's not the mansion or the exotic vacation photos. True wealth is waking up and realizing you don't dread the day ahead. It's having skills so valuable that opportunity seeks you out instead of the other way around. It's being so grounded in your principles that external chaos can't shake your internal peace. I've watched people chase the appearance of success for decades, and here's what I've learned. The ones who look successful but feel empty inside followed someone else's blueprint. They optimized for applause instead of alignment. They built a life that photographs well but feels hollow to live in. The ones who seem quieter, less flashy, but carry this unmistakable presence, those are the people who did the work no one sees, who failed in private repeatedly until they figured it out, Who said no to 1,000 tempting shortcuts because they were playing a longer game? Your transformation isn't going to be televised. There won't be a soundtrack or a montage. Most people won't notice until you're so far ahead, they can't ignore it anymore. And here's the thing that might sting a little. Some people in your life right now won't be happy about your transformation. Your growth will make them uncomfortable because it highlights their stagnation. Your discipline will feel like judgment of their chaos. Your peace will unsettle their drama. This is normal. This is expected. This is part of the process. You're not changing to abandon anyone. You're changing because staying the same would be abandoning yourself. And you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't guide others to a place you've never been. You can't give what you don't have. So yes, some relationships will shift. Some will end. Some people will choose to grow alongside you. Others will choose resentment instead. Neither outcome is your responsibility to manage. Your only job is to keep becoming. I've watched this play out in countless forms. A man dedicates 20 years to a craft, finally earns recognition, and suddenly, his childhood friend stops returning his letters. A woman launches the business she dreamed about for a decade, and her sister makes cutting remarks about people who think they're better than everyone else. The success didn't change them. It changed what others saw when they looked at them, and that reflection was unbearable. Here's what I learned, and it took me far too long. You cannot shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You cannot dim your light to ease someone else's darkness. The moment you start apologizing for your growth, you begin the slow process of unbecoming everything you worked to build. Let me be direct. When someone responds to your success with coldness, they're telling you something important not about you, but about where they are. They're showing you that they've chosen to interpret your expansion as their diminishment. That's a story they're telling themselves. It's not a story you need to adopt. I made this mistake more than once. When certain colleagues grew distant after my printing business flourished, I tried to downplay my achievements in their presence. I'd minimize my success, change the subject when discussing new contracts, and even apologize indirectly for doing well. You know what happened? They didn't respect me more. They respected me less. Because they could sense the dishonesty, the pretense, and nothing breeds contempt quite like watching someone pretend to be smaller than they are. Authenticity demands we stand in our truth. If you've worked, sacrificed, persisted, and earned something, own it. Not with arrogance, not with comparison, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their own journey. You're not responsible for managing someone else's insecurity about that journey. You're only responsible for continuing it. Some people will never celebrate you. They'll watch you climb and hope you stumble. They'll interpret your every move through the lens of their own stagnation. This isn't cruelty on their part, it's usually pain. But their pain doesn't require your paralysis. The healthiest thing you can do is keep growing and grant them the space to feel however they need to feel about it. Without explanation, without defense, without making yourself small. Because you're not proving a point anymore. You're living your truth. And here's what I want you to understand about living your truth. It doesn't mean you become rigid. It doesn't mean you stop growing or learning or evolving. It means you stop abandoning yourself for approval. I knew a woman who spent her entire life accommodating. Her partner wanted quiet evenings at home, so she gave up theater, something that made her feel alive. Her friends preferred casual dinners, so she stopped attending gallery openings. Her family expected traditional holidays, so she abandoned her dream of traveling during Christmas. And every time someone asked her what she wanted, she'd smile and say, "Oh, I'm easy. Whatever works for everyone else." Until one day, her daughter asked her a simple question. "Mom, what do you actually like to do?" And she realized she didn't know anymore. She'd spent so many years molding herself to fit other people's preferences that she'd lost touch with her own. That's what accommodation does. It erodes you so gradually, you don't even notice you're disappearing. So, she started small. She went to the theater alone one Tuesday evening. She didn't announce it. She didn't ask permission. She simply went. And you know what happened? Nothing catastrophic. Her partner survived. The world kept spinning. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years herself. That's the power of reclaiming your preferences. Not every battle, not every moment, but enough that you remember who you are. Because here's the truth about boundaries and authenticity. They're not about being difficult. They're about being honest. When you say no to something that drains you, you're saying yes to something that sustains you. When you speak your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, you're inviting genuine connection instead of performing for acceptance. And the people who truly love you, they don't want a performance. They want you. The real, imperfect, sometimes inconvenient, beautifully complex you. Everyone else can find someone else to perform for. And here's what I've learned about finding those people. They reveal themselves not in the grand gestures, but in the small, unguarded moments. They're the ones who notice when you've gone quiet. The ones who ask, "How are you, really?" and then wait for the real answer. They're the ones who remember what you mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago, who send you that article because I thought of you, who don't keep score of who reached out last. They're the ones who can sit with you in silence without making it awkward, who celebrate your wins without jealousy and mourn your losses without making them about themselves. They're the ones who call you on your patterns gently, who hold you accountable without shame, who see your potential without dismissing your present. I found mine in the most unexpected places. Not at the networking events or the carefully curated social gatherings, but in the support group I almost didn't attend, in the comments section of a vulnerable post I almost deleted, in the conversation that started because we were both early to something and made awkward small talk that turned real. They weren't the people I thought I needed. They didn't have the right credentials or connections. They weren't the coolest, or most successful, or most put together. They were just real. Consistently, reliably, beautifully real. And that realness created permission for my own. Building this kind of community doesn't happen overnight. It requires something our culture doesn't value much: patience. Patience with the process of getting to know someone beyond their surface. Patience with the awkward early stages where you're not sure if this is a real connection or just pleasantries. Patience with yourself, as you learn to be vulnerable in small doses, testing the waters before diving deep. It requires showing up, even when it's easier to isolate, even when your brain tells you that everyone would be better off without you there, even when you feel like you have nothing to offer. Sometimes showing up with nothing but your presence is exactly what's needed for them, or for you, or for the space between you where connection lives. It requires reciprocity, not in the transactional sense, but in the energetic one. If someone keeps showing up for you, eventually you need to show up for them, too. Not keeping score, but maintaining balance. Relationships are living things. They need tending from both sides to thrive. And here's what I've learned about boundaries in friendship. They're not walls. They're property lines. They don't keep people out. They define where you end, and they begin. The friends who respect your boundaries are the ones who respect you. The ones who push back when you say no are telling you something important about how they see you as a resource, not a person. I used to think good friends never said no to each other. That availability was loyalty. But I watched friendships collapse under the weight of that expectation. One person gives until they're empty, then resents. The other takes until there's nothing left, then wonders what happened. Both sides lose because neither understood that boundaries preserve relationships rather than limit them. The healthiest friendships I've witnessed have clear boundaries that both people honor without resentment. I can't tonight, but let's plan for next week. I love you, but I can't loan money. It's a personal rule. I need some alone time. It's not about you. These statements don't damage friendship. They protect it. They prevent the slow accumulation of unspoken resentments that eventually poison even the strongest bonds. And there's this paradox. The friends who give you the most space are often the ones who stay closest. They're not demanding constant attention or validation. They're not making their emotional stability your responsibility. They trust the foundation enough to let you breathe, knowing you'll return when you're ready. That trust creates safety, and safety creates depth. I've also noticed that the best friends bring out versions of you that you actually like, not the version that tries too hard or hides too much, but the one that feels most authentically you. They create space where you can be relaxed, honest, and even silly without judgment. If a friendship consistently makes you feel like you need to perform or pretend, that's not comfort, that's labor. And here's something nobody talks about. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let a friendship end gracefully. Not every connection is meant to last forever, and that doesn't diminish what it was. People change, circumstances shift, and paths diverge. Forcing a friendship past its natural expiration date serves no one. There's dignity in acknowledging that you shared something valuable for a season, and now that season has passed. The friendships that endure are the ones built on mutual reality rather than mutual need. You're not friends because you fill each other's voids. You're friends because you genuinely enjoy who the other person is. That distinction matters more than most people realize. In my day, I watched friendships dissolve the moment they became transactional. A merchant who befriended another only to gain access to his shipping routes. A politician who cultivated relationships solely to secure votes. These weren't friendships, they were business arrangements, disguised as camaraderie. And when the transaction was completed or failed, the friendship evaporated like morning fog. True friendship operates on an entirely different currency. It's about shared laughter over shared values. It's about the person who asks about your mother's health, not because they need something, but because they actually care. It's the friend who celebrates your promotion without a trace of envy, who mourns your setbacks without judgment. I had such a friend in a printer named Hugh Meredith. We worked together in Keimer's shop, and though Hugh ultimately wasn't suited to the trade, our friendship outlasted our business partnership. Why? Because it was never really about the business. We enjoyed each other's company. We challenged each other's thinking. When he left printing to return to farming, we remained friends until his death. The foundation was genuine, not conditional. This is why desperation erodes friendship so thoroughly. When you need someone, you can't truly see them. You see what they represent: salvation, validation, escape, security. You see a function, not a person. And people sense this. They feel themselves being reduced to a utility. The healthiest friendships I've maintained began from a place of wholeness, not from hollowness. I approached others with curiosity, not neediness. I offered my authentic self, not a performance calibrated to win approval. And in return, I received friendships that weathered decades, distance, and disagreement. So when I tell you that desperation makes you unlikable, I'm really telling you something more profound. It makes you incapable of forming the very connections you're desperately seeking. It's not just that others pull away, it's that you're not actually present enough to build something real. You're too busy drowning to swim alongside someone.